Some people scroll TikTok or Instagram on their phone, but here I am obsessively tracking my weather app to see if it's cool enough to wear my new favorite item, a gorgeous cashmere sweater that I got from Quince. Now, I've been eyeing their cashmere for a while, but kinda didn't believe a quality cashmere item could be priced so low. But I decided to go for it, and I can tell you, this sweater is absolutely divine. It's a navy blue boat neck sweater with lovely drape, and I'm telling you, I'm going to be wearing this thing everywhere this fall. Going to the grocery store, wearing my sweater. Taking in a Pilates class, I'm throwing the sweater on before and after. Out for a date with my love bug? Yep, blue sweater. Recording for the podcast? Guess what? I'm wearing it right now. Here's another thing I love about Quince. Not only do they work directly with ethical manufacturers, but they pass all those savings onto their customers. So I can get gorgeous Mongolian cashmere sweaters, cotton cardigans, and even super soft denim at a fraction of the cost. 50 to 80% less than similar brands. And now that I say that, I realize I gotta get some more of these sweaters. Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/nursemo for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/nursemo to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/nursemo. Well, hello there. I'm Nurse Mo, and this is the Straight A Nursing Podcast, where I teach concepts and share tips on how to thrive in nursing school and at the bedside. Today, we're hopping into a mental health topic. Of course, before we do that, let's take a very quick minute for a listener shout out. This one goes out to Elizabeth, who says, Nurse Mo is my new best friend and nursing guru, a must for any nursing student. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and I'm happy to be your new BFF. So today we're talking about a mental health topic, something that will definitely show up on exams if you're a student, and something that you will definitely encounter in the clinical setting, whether you're a student nurse or a practicing nurse, and that is this concept of defense mechanisms. So a really big part of mental health nursing is recognizing defense mechanisms, which are, for the most part, unconscious psychological processes that individuals use to cope with reality and all the stresses that come with that. Now, by helping the patient recognize when these defenses are being used, you can help them gain self-awareness and a better understanding of their behavior. And also important to be able to recognize defense mechanisms, especially the more maladaptive ones, because this can help prevent you from being manipulated by others. So defense mechanisms can be grouped into two main categories: adaptive and maladaptive. So first, we'll talk about some adaptive defense mechanisms. So you might also hear these called mature defenses. These can definitely be more helpful than the other ones we're going to talk about in just a moment. And they generally involve an acceptance of reality rather than an overt denial of reality. Adaptive defense mechanisms include altruism, humor, sublimation, and suppression. So let's first talk about altruism. So an individual using altruism as a defense mechanism will do good deeds as a way to overcome hardship or overcome stress. So a great example of this might be the parent of a child who died from cancer hosts an annual fundraiser to benefit cancer research. A defining characteristic of altruism is that the individual does not expect anything in return. Using this defense mechanism can have several benefits, including reduced stress, personal growth through expression of empathy or compassion, a sense of connection that comes with reaching out to others, and an overall enhanced sense of well-being that comes with the endorphin boost of doing a good thing. So this is definitely an adaptive, definitely a more positive defense mechanism. And sometimes when we're looking at these more positive defense mechanisms, you might hear them called coping mechanisms because they are helpful in helping us cope. All right, next we have humor. I'm a huge user of this one. Many individuals use humor to diffuse tension in uncomfortable or stressful situations. For example, a nursing student who is nervous about the final exam makes a joke about how sweaty their palms are, or something like that. I do this all the time, and I'm usually pretty awkward about it. And in most cases, it makes it even worse. But humor is definitely an adaptive coping mechanism. Next is sublimation. So, sublimation is when an individual compensates for an inadequacy or an emotion that they're not so comfortable with by focusing their energy in another way. For example, a woman who just went through a really tough breakup might focus their energy on remodeling their house. And then we have suppression, the last of our adaptive defense mechanisms that we're talking about today. So, the act of suppression involves consciously pushing away unpleasant emotions or thoughts. So, we push them out of our consciousness. For example, an individual who survived a really bad car accident may find that they regularly are pushing those thoughts out of their head. Note that if that unpleasant emotion or unpleasant thought or memory is not ultimately recognized and dealt with, suppression can become maladaptive. So we talked about adaptive defense mechanisms, altruism, humor, sublimation, and suppression. Altruism was doing good things to overcome a hardship or an uncomfortable emotion. Humor was, that's pretty self-explanatory, using humor to diffuse tension. And then sublimation was compensating for an inadequacy or an emotion they're not comfortable with by focusing their energy on something else. And then suppression is when you're consciously pushing unpleasant thoughts or emotions out of your head. Okay, now let's talk about the many more maladaptive defense mechanisms that you're likely to see on an exam or in the clinical setting. The first of these is denial. So, denial occurs when the individual refuses to accept facts or refuses to accept reality. And they do this because they can't handle the emotional impact of that reality. For example, a patient may simply deny they have diabetes, even though their A1C is 8.5%, and say, I can eat whatever I want. I don't have any medical conditions. Well, they're in denial. Projection is another maladaptive defense mechanism. And this is when an individual attributes their own troubling faults to someone else. For example, a nursing student who regularly makes mistakes in the clinical setting spreads rumors and gossips and says that others in her clinical group are incompetent. And then repression. Repression is the act of completely putting traumatic past events out of your mind as a way to cope. For example, a person comes to terms years later with the fact that she had been assaulted as a child and had repressed those memories for many, many years. Repression can also be used to hide unpleasant thoughts or beliefs from the individual's own consciousness as well. But in general, it's when you put this event completely out of your consciousness and then maybe come to realize later that this terrible thing happened and you had repressed that memory. Regression is going back to a childlike or lower functioning state as a way to not deal with problems or the stresses of life. This is typically most evident in young children who regress to things like sucking their thumb or bedwetting when faced with stressful events. However, it's important to note that adults can regress also. They don't necessarily regress back to bedwetting or thumb sucking, but there can be some regression in adults. Another maladaptive defense mechanism is displacement. This is the act of transferring an emotion to someone or something that is not threatening. For example, a student gets a failing grade on an assignment and goes home and is angry at their spouse. So the threatening environment or the threatening thing that happened was that they got a failing grade on an assignment. So they transfer that to something that's not as threatening. And in this case, it could be their spouse. So you get a bad grade on a test, you go home and you yell at your spouse. And then another is reaction formation. Reaction formation is a defense mechanism that involves doing the opposite of your convictions or your feelings. For example, a person with negative feelings toward their spouse reacts to them in an overtly affectionate way. Now, because there are quite a few maladaptive defense mechanisms we're going to go through today, let's review the ones we've talked about already. So far, we've talked about denial, projection, repression, regression, displacement, and reaction formation. So, quick summary. Denial is when we're not accepting facts as reality. Projection is when we attribute our own faults onto someone else. Repression is when we completely put past traumas out of our memory. Regression is when we revert to a more childlike or lower functioning state. Displacement is when we displace our frustration onto something that is not as threatening to us. And then reaction formation is basically doing the opposite of how we feel. Okay, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll go through some more maladaptive defense mechanisms.
If you send hey, they send hey. But with opening moves on Bumble, you can get to better chats faster. Because if you send most underrated summer activity, they send eating spicy soup in front of the air conditioner on full blast. And that's something you can work with. You're still making the first move, but you can choose a question or write your own to get sent to all your matches. So you can relax and see what they come back with. Download Bumble and try it for yourself.
All right, let's continue on with our maladaptive defense mechanisms. Somatization. So, somatization is an unconscious way of expressing psychological distress through physical manifestations. An example could be a student who throws up prior to an exam, or the individual who feels physically weak after learning their child or their spouse has been arrested for a DUI. And then there's rationalization. Rationalization is explaining your behavior or justifying your actions with unreasonable explanations. For example, a nurse who bombs his interview for a managerial position states he didn't want to work those hours anyway. And then we have passive aggression. An individual using passive aggression deals with negative feelings in a covert or unassertive way. For example, a nursing student loses the work she did on a group project because she doesn't like the individuals in her group, or she thinks that group projects are dumb and a waste of time. And then there's dissociation. Mentally kind of checking out or going somewhere else or feeling disconnected as a way to cope with severe trauma is dissociation. In some cases, dissociation affects the individual's ability to even remember past traumatic events. For example, a nursing student is mugged after class and says, "It just felt so unreal, like it was happening to someone else." And then next is devaluation. Devaluation assigns exaggerated negative qualities to a person or place or thing while ignoring the good qualities. For example, An envious mother-in-law may describe her son's wife as totally worthless and lazy, despite the fact that she works full-time and contributes equally to the household. Now, the opposite of that is idealization. Idealization is when individuals assign overly exaggerated positive qualities to a person, place, or thing. Now, individuals who partake in idealization may not see others for who they truly are, and this can lead to unrealistic expectations. For example, let's say you have a man who idealizes his girlfriend and thinks she's absolutely perfect and that they're going to get married and live happily ever after, despite the fact that she's regularly and not so secretly cheating on him. And then splitting is the last one that we're talking about. Splitting is the act of cycling between devaluation and idealization. It is typically utilized with individuals who have borderline personality disorder and places individuals on extreme sides of the spectrum with shifts between the two happening rapidly. It can be very disorienting for those on the receiving end if they're not aware of what is happening. For example, when you bring your patient a snack, you are the most amazing nurse ever. But later, when you tell the patient, oh, you have to be NPO after midnight for procedure tomorrow, you're now the worst nurse they've ever had. So you can see how that would be really disorienting for a person. And this is a manipulation tactic that individuals will use to try to get you to do what they want. So be aware of splitting. All right, so since we took our break, we talked about somatization, rationalization, passive aggression, dissociation, devaluation, idealization, and splitting. Let's do our quick overview of those. So, somatization was when psychological distress comes through in a physical manifestation. Rationalization was explaining your behavior or justifying your actions. Passive aggression is when you deal with negative feelings in a covert or unassertive way. Dissociation is when you mentally kind of go somewhere else or feel disconnected about a traumatic event. Devaluation is going to assign exaggerated negative qualities to a person, place, or thing. And then idealization is the opposite of that, assigning this overly positive qualities to a person, place, or thing. And then splitting is when the individual goes back and forth from one extreme to the other. So now we're going to do a pod quiz on all these different defense mechanisms. And if you've never heard of a pod quiz before, then what I basically do is ask a question and pause for a little bit to give you time to answer. I do this at the end of quite a few of the episodes, and I do it a lot inside Study Sesh, which is an audio-based program where we do a ton of pod quizzes and we do some other engaged learning activities to help you solidify the information you're learning in nursing school. So, ready to dive into a pod quiz? Let's do this. All right, what defense mechanism is this? When the individual goes back to a childlike or lower functioning state. That is regression. Very good. What is it called when an individual justifies their behavior or actions with kind of an unreasonable explanation? That is rationalization. Excellent. How about this one? What is it called when the individual assigns exaggerated negative qualities to a person, place, or thing? That is devaluation. What would this be an example of? You have a parent who has lost a child to cancer, and now they donate a large sum of money to cancer research every year. That is altruism. Very good. How about this one? What is the act of consciously pushing unpleasant emotions or thoughts out of your conscious awareness? That is suppression. What is this one? When you attribute your own troubling faults to someone else. That is projection. How about this one? What is it when we compensate for an inadequacy or an emotion that we're not comfortable with by focusing our energy in another way? That is sublimation. And next, what is it called when the individual just straight up refuses to accept facts or reality? That one is denial. What is the defense mechanism that involves doing the opposite of your convictions or your feelings? That is reaction formation. What is it called when the individual just mentally goes somewhere else or feels disconnected as a way to cope with severe trauma? That was dissociation. What is it called when an individual ascribes a person, place, or thing with exaggerated positive qualities and completely ignores anything negative? That was idealization. Very good. What is when someone transfers an emotion to someone or something that is not threatening to them as a way to handle their stress? That was displacement. Very good. What is the act of completely and unconsciously putting traumatic events out of your mind as a way to cope? That was repression. Very good. What is it called when there is a physical manifestation of psychological stress? That is somatization. What is it called when the individual goes to the two extremes between devaluation and idealization? That was called splitting. And then what is it when someone deals with negative feelings in an unassertive way? That was passive aggression. Okay, now we're going to go through and do all of these again. I'll mix them up in a different order. And instead of using kind of that definition or the description of the defense mechanism, I'll use the example of the defense mechanism in action. Okay, are you ready? All right, let's do this. Let's say we have that nurse who bombs their job interview, doesn't prepare, bombs the interview, and says, I didn't want to work those hours anyway. That was rationalization. How about the envious mother in law describing her son's wife as totally worthless and totally lazy, despite the fact that she's working full time, she's grocery shopping, doing the laundry, taking the kids to things, planning meals, doing all the things? What is that called? That is devaluation. This person is just assigning those exaggerated negative qualities to a person and not recognizing anything good about them. What about the parent of the child that died from cancer who puts on the big annual fundraiser for cancer research every year? That was altruism. Very good. What about the patient who says, I don't care if my A1C is 8.5%. That doesn't mean I have diabetes. That patient is using denial. What about a child who had been completely sleeping through the night with a dry bed when their parents go through a divorce? Now the child is bedwetting again. That is regression. What about this one? A woman goes through a terrible breakup and puts all her energy and attention into remodeling her house. That is sublimation. What about the person who has negative feelings toward their spouse but reacts to them in an overtly affectionate way? That is reaction formation. What about the nursing student who loses the work she did on a group project because she doesn't like the people in her group and she thinks group projects are dumb? That is passive aggression. What about the individual who survived a pretty significant car crash and finds that in the days and weeks after, they are regularly and consciously pushing these scary thoughts out of their mind? That is suppression. What about that nursing student who's always making mistakes in clinical, spreading rumors that everyone else in her clinical group is incompetent? That is projection. What about the student who failed an assignment and came home and yelled at their spouse? That is displacement. What is it when that nursing student who was mugged after class says, it just felt so unreal, like it was happening to someone else? That would be an example of dissociation. What about the student who throws up prior to an exam? That's an example of somatization. What about the person who comes to realize years later that she had been assaulted as a child and repressed those memories for many years? That is repression. What about the man who idealizes his girlfriend and thinks she's absolutely perfect? They're going to get married, have 2.4 children, live happily ever after, even though she's not that nice to him and she's kind of not too subtle about cheating on him. That is idealization. And then what is it when you bring your patient a snack and they're like, oh my gosh, Mallory, you're the most amazing nurse ever. You care about me more than anybody else here. Thank you. But later, when you tell them they have to be NPO after midnight, she says, I can't believe you're the worst nurse I've ever had. This place sucks. That is an example of splitting. So there you go. You just did a pod quiz, and hopefully it helped solidify your understanding of these common defense mechanisms. If you'd like to dive into more pod quizzes, then you should definitely check out Study Sesh. You can just go to the Straight A Nursing Student website and click on courses in the top menu bar. Or if you're somewhere where you can jot this down, go to straightanursingstudent.com/study, and that will take you to the information as well. So thank you so much for spending your free time or your commute time or your folding the laundry time with me today. I really enjoy spending this time with you every week, and I hope to see you back here next week. We're going to be hopping on over into maternal newborn land and talking about neonatal hypoglycemia. See you then. This podcast is brought to you by Straight A Nursing, a proud member of the Airwave Media Network. For more educational podcasts, check out airwavemedia.com. And for more nursing-related content, go to straightanursingstudent.com.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.